slide of the speaker while I'm talking. The introductory slide of the speaker, please. And in the meantime, I'll tell you about the survey. See, survey methodology is something which is very important. Today, a lot of us have to depend on surveys. And because without a survey, it is not possible to get a cross-sectional view of the society or of any research project. You know, when you do a research project, you do it maybe in your own institute, and you may have encounter certain types of problems only. But when you do a survey, you are researching over a large population, over the country, people across different types of subjects are involved. So that makes a lot of difference. And so a survey is very important. And to design a survey is something more important than that. And designing a survey involves the person who is doing the survey has to be very sure of what the person wants. So it is like a question, what are questions to target in the survey, and that is what makes the survey important. It is just not that you make a survey, you ask somebody's name, numbers, how many patients of cholecystectomy did you do. That's not important. The designing of the questions is very important. Only then you'll get the right kind of answers, and then you are doing the research properly. And to talk about this, we have Dr. Pradeep Dongare. Dr. Pradeep Dongare is the assistant professor in the Department of Anesthesiology at ESIC Medical College and Postgraduate Institute of Medical Sciences at Rajaji Nagar, Bangalore. See, as you may be knowing, ESIC has started multiple postgraduate institutes. From what I know, there's one at Delhi and the other one is at Bangalore. They have got other medical colleges also. And Dr. Dongare is a reviewer of IJ, of course. He's a reviewer of the Airway Journal. He's an ex-executive member of the ISA Karnataka, an executive member of the Airway Society, and an academic council member of the University of Health Sciences. Without taking more time, I would request Dr. Pradeep Dongare to please take over the subject and talk about and enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mukul sir, and it's an honor to be speaking in this forum of ISA and IJ, and in front of all Chakra Rao sir and Mukul sir, and so many other luminaries here. I think, can I share the slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It's nice. Okay. Good evening, everyone. And I'm Pradeep Dongare from ESI Medical College and PGIMSR Rajaji Nagar. And again, I would like to thank ISAIJ and Dr. Rakesh, Dr. Mukul, all of them for giving me this opportunity on speaking about development and validation of a questionnaire in your survey methodology. So today I'll be speaking a little bit about surveys, what are the types of surveys, and I'll be going into trying to explain to you some statistical methods used to validate a questionnaire. I won't be going to the depth of these things because a statistician would be a better person to talk about the exact methodology and where to use what. But I'll be giving you an overview so that probably it would help you and it would give you the knowledge of what you need to know, right? So actually, what is a survey? If you go back, as Mukul sir was telling us, in a survey, you select a large population, you just administer an instrument to that population, and you collect some necessary information. You would have decided on some particular problem that you would want to address in your either in a daily practice or in your research. So you try to get this information, necessary information from this population. And usually there is no control or an intervention. And as it is mentioned earlier, it's something like a cross-sectional study. At one, it can be over a period of time. It can be a longitudinal study also, but most of it is a cross-sectional study. You try to obtain information at one particular point of time. So it is basically a research strategy that you use. It can be used for various things. It can be used to collect information from the society about the present problem. It can be used to collect information so that you're able to generate a hypothesis for future research. So it can be any kind of, right? So what are the main advantages of your survey questionnaire or survey strategy that you use? So you should remember that whatever data you collect is generally real world and it is empirical data. And most of the times, because it is given to distributed over a large population, even though you calculate a sample size for it, even though it is given to a large population, the results are generally generalizable to a larger population. Then you definitely use finite timelines. The timelines for your survey are fixed, and you can complete your survey. It may take 2 months or 3 months from the start, and you may be able to do it in a short period of time also. Second thing is there is not much of cost involved. If you want to do some kind of research with a low cost, I think survey is a very good instrument. Of course, if you are trying to do a survey with a face-to-face interview or by telephonic interviews, that may cost you a little bit. There may be some expenditure in that. Generally, if you're trying to do an electronic version or a handwritten survey and you're just distributing it to people around you, then it may not cost that much. And you may be able to get large amount of data. That is one more advantage of doing a survey. And this data, of course, this data collecting this large amount of data again may work as a disadvantage to you too, because you need to compile this data and arrange this data in proper order. And of course, surveys again have many disadvantages. You may not be able to get the depth of whatever information you want to. In the sense, you may get only superficial information. The questions it may not be possible to design questions in such a way that you get the complete depth of the details or the details that you actually want from your respondents. And sometimes it's always possible that even though they get the data, the researchers may not be able to recognize or the importance of the data, that particular kind of data. So that's also a possibility. And your survey result generalizability always depends on the response rate. So you get a good response rate, then definitely your survey is generalizable to the population. You don't get a good response rate, again, there's a problem there. Your results may be concentrated to one particular population and it may not apply to a generalized population. So these things are some things that can be very disadvantageous to you. Second thing is, you should remember that it also depends, whatever answers the data you get, it depends on the honesty and the memory of, sometimes on the memory of the respondents also. So if they tend to forget the events that have occurred in their practice or something, you're trying to collect the data, they may just not recollect and say, no, such an event has never occurred in my life or in my practice. So definitely your data is not going to be very good then. And some of the respondents may not want to give honest answers at certain circumstances. It's possible. It is always possible that I myself would not want to give out certain data at a particular point of time. And of course, it depends the quality of your data or the honesty and the memory and everything at which they give you the data or the information that you actually want. It again depends on the understanding of your respondents. So again, your survey questionnaire, if it's just in English, if you're giving it to lay people, let us say, for example, you're doing a survey on satisfaction of your patients in the preoperative room or something, on the post-operative care of because of your team, anesthesiology team. Let us say that is one of the surveys you're trying to conduct. But unfortunately, you need to remember that you just give the survey questionnaire in a single language. All the patients may not understand it. You may not get the right kind of data. So these are some of the disadvantages of your survey. So now, whenever you start a research, any kind of research, whether it is a survey, whether it's a randomized control trial, an observational trial, always define your problem. A problem well stated is a problem half solved. So Let us say, for example, I want to design, why do you need to define this problem? That's very, very important. Let us say I want to conduct a course on artificial intelligence for my anesthesia colleagues. So why do you need to design a survey for this kind of thing? So I may want to know what my colleagues would find useful. That is very, very important when you're designing such a course or designing a workshop for them. Or you may want to know how much they already know. So many of the people may know many things about artificial intelligence, and you may just need to give them some pointers. So you may need to know where you have to concentrate on more and what are the sessions you need to include. So it's very important to define your problem and what you want to assess in the population. This second main important step in planning is planning your project. So the first step in planning your project is to pick a team. Have a good team and a team you can communicate easily with. It's very, very important when you're designing a survey or designing your questionnaire. You need to have a like-minded statistician too. A biostatistician would really, really help, or at least one of the members should have some knowledge of the statistics that is actually involved. So you should remember that there are various stages at which the statistician would be very, very important to you. He may be very important to you at the time of calculating the sample size of your survey. It's very, very important to have a statistician, especially for validating your survey questionnaire. It's very important to analyze the data. The kind of analysis you should do may be varied depending on the type of data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. So having a good statistician is very, very good for your survey. And then you need to fix your timelines. So a Gantt chart would really, really help even for a survey, as it does for a randomized control trial or an observational trial. And this would really help you in progressing with your survey as fast as possible and getting the data. And you need to plan the expenditure. You need to plan where you want to publish your survey beforehand. And need to plan how you want the data to be entered. It's very important that these aspects of your survey is planned and ready by the time you administer your survey, or at least by the time you really frame your survey questionnaire. I'll just give you an overview of the types of surveys. There are two kinds of surveys: descriptive survey and explanatory survey. Descriptive survey, you just describe the data that you collect. For example, you just give the percentages of the number of people who know about artificial intelligence. Explanatory surveys are when you try to link a cause and an effect. For example, you group the people into different age groups and say these many people had more knowledge compared to this age group. This kind of survey would be an explanatory survey, right? And coming to survey instruments or your questionnaires, there are two types of scales that you can use. Two types of questionnaires. They can be unidimensional or multidimensional. So unidimensional survey questionnaires they just talk about one aspect of your of the person's. It may be, for example, knowledge. It may be just the attitude of people. It may be a practice that they follow. So these are usually unidimensional. When it comes to multidimensional, it can measure the knowledge, the attitude, the practice. There are so many things that it can actually concentrate on. So it may not be concentrated on one particular aspect. So you need to decide how you're going to administer your survey beforehand, right? Before you actually get ready with your questionnaire, you need to know what is the type of questionnaire that you would need. Is it a written survey? It is a verbal survey, or are you going to use mixed methods? You're going to give both written surveys and verbal surveys. So this is very, very important to you. So you need to base your questions on that and administer them. Administer them at a later date becomes very, very easy if you plan it beforehand. So again, as I mentioned here, Written surveys can be two kinds of surveys. There are postal questionnaires or web-based surveys. These are called as self-administered surveys. That means that you just design the survey questionnaire and you're going to give it to the respondent. The respondent will read the question and definitely try to answer the question based on his understanding. So it is a self-administered questionnaire, whereas a face-to-face interview and telephonic interviews, these are verbal and interview surveys. Here, what happens is there is one advantage. You're always available if the person, the respondent has a doubt, he can always answer a particular question. You're always available and he can clarify his doubt, what you actually want to know from by asking that question. That can be clarified at any stage. But in written and self-administered surveys, this is not a possibility. So these are some of the examples as mentioned here. There is one survey on medication errors, if you know, and this has been circulated by electronic mail. There is one more on postal surveys in primary care, and this has been distributed postally. So these are written surveys. And if you go to postal questionnaires and web-based, these are, as I mentioned earlier, these are cold and there is no contact between the researcher and the respondent. This can be an advantage to the researcher because he doesn't have to spend more he doesn't have to spend time on training people to administer the survey, but it's going to be a disadvantage in the sense that the respondent cannot clarify his doubt if he has some doubts as such. And the other advantage with a postal or a web-based survey is you can really send it across a large geographical area or a large population easily and over a short period of time, whereas interview-based and your telephone-based surveys take a lot of training and a lot of time over which you need to distribute them. Generally, these kinds of surveys have a very low response rate. That is because there's no personal contact between the researcher and the respondent. He's not there to clarify the doubts. He's not there to convince the respondent to respond to his survey. So it is just a written statement that he requests them to participate. So the response rate is very, very low, generally around 20%. So you need a very large sample size. Of course, nowadays there are many ways, easier ways by which you can distribute these surveys. You can use SurveyMonkey. You can design the questions. You can order the questions. You can use logic. Skip logic. There are lots of ways available in which you can design your questionnaire there. And Google Forms is also there. SurveyMonkey, the only problem is more than 10 questions you have to pay. Google Forms, as of today, is free. That is the advantage with Google Forms. So if you take, these are two types of surveys, again, a face-to-face survey and a telephonic survey. As I mentioned earlier, face-to-face or telephone surveys, there is physical contact, or at least he is able to talk to the respondent. And this increases the bonding between the researcher and the respondent and definitely increases the response rate. So usually response rates need to be high, or at least a sample size has to be calculated so that a large population can be covered. That if the response rate is low, you're expecting a very low response rate, at least you can achieve a proper sample size. So so again, you can balance with the physical face-to-face interview or a telephonic interview. You can always balance the demographic profile of your respondents, but the only problem is it's going to be very, 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 very time-consuming and costly. You need to train your interviewers. You need to train your people who are going to call the respondents telephonically. And definitely the responses are not going to be private. You cannot have anonymous surveys done with this method because most of the interviewers will know the answer. So that is one disadvantage. If there is some survey you would like to do anonymously, cannot definitely be done by a face-to-face interview. As I mentioned earlier, telephonic interviews are also two-way interactions. They are a little bit cheaper compared to face-to-face, but still they cost a little bit of money. You need to have enough number of interviewers who are going to respond to respondents telephonically, and definitely higher response rate is there compared to your postal or your web surveys, but it is not as much as a face-to-face survey. The next step after you plan your survey and how you're going to administer it, probably the strategy of administration is to frame a research question. You stated the problem. Now you need to transfer your problem into a proper research question. And the research strategy should be decided with an appropriate research question. And it's always important to follow the FICO format while you're trying to frame the research question, and simply trying to collect data and trying to find what is significant or what can be used by you is going to be cumbersome and illogical. And it may not offer any direction to your research. It may be a wasted exercise. You may find it as a wasted exercise at a later date. So it's always best to frame your research question before you start your survey, and once you have identified the problem that you want to address. So what is a good research question? Pertaining to the previous problem, what is the knowledge among anesthesiologists on the current use of artificial intelligence, or what is the knowledge of AI among anesthesiologists? Which looks better? I think probably the shorter the question and more pointed the question, and some which do not have adjectives or adverbs would be a better research question. And probably the second one would be a research question, better research question. Once you've framed your research question, you need to obtain a lot of amount of knowledge about your research question and try to find two things when you're looking for literature on your research question. It may reveal that your research question has already been answered by a survey which has been done in your own locality. Already there's an existing survey. So doing another survey with the same research question may not yield any different result. So it may be a wasted exercise. That is one thing that it can reveal. Or it can also reveal that probably there is a validated questionnaire available. You want to address some research question. There is already a validated questionnaire that you can always use. There is no survey as such done, but somebody has validated a questionnaire or validated it in another country, not in your region, and your research problem is region specific. So you may be able to adapt that validated questionnaire, translate that validated questionnaire to your research problem, and slightly edit it or modify it so that the validation still is acceptable, and then you can use the same questionnaire. So after you've done all these things, now you go into the exercise of developing your own instrument, your tool, or your questionnaire, and or you try to adapt the existing questionnaire and try to translate it or use it in your locality or for your sample population. So now you should always remember that if you're trying to adapt the questionnaire, it's always better to take permission from the people who have actually designed that questionnaire, and modify it in such a way that it doesn't affect their validity. And you can have a panel of experts for that who would actually advise you or give you good pointers, and your team members, they can always contribute to modify this questionnaire, and so that in such a way that the validity of the questionnaire is not affected. So let us say, for example, there is no questionnaire on your particular research problem available, research question. So you need to construct a new questionnaire. So whenever you need to construct a new questionnaire, you need to know that you need to have a panel of experts among your team. So your team should contain enough experts on the particular subject who will be able to give you insight on the relevant items to include during the development of your questionnaire. Then you need to go through a Delphi process. Usually it takes around 3 steps. You design, you frame a set of questions, you send it across to all your experts, they give their inputs, then you modify your questions based on that. And then they need to rate your questions and say, this is acceptable, unacceptable, need to modify, whatever it is. And this goes on for 2 or 3 processes until everybody comes to a consensus or sometimes maybe more than 3 actually, until everybody comes to a consensus and says all these questions are acceptable and we can use this questionnaire, and now we need to validate this particular questionnaire on instrument. Right. So whenever, let us talk a little bit about how to develop and what are the types of items or questions you're going to use in your questionnaire. So now, whenever I refer to an item, when it comes to a questionnaire, it means a question that you're going to ask. So item is a question, and it has 2 parts actually. It has a stem, or it tells you what it wants from you. That is your stem, and the next part is your what you want the respondents to respond to. So those are your answers or your choices, whatever you call them. And the quality of the item determines the quality of the data that is obtained. So you should remember that while designing your questionnaire, repeated revision of your question or your item helps a lot. So the question or your item has to be very, very clear. So the respondent should be given a choice to at least agree with the statement or disagree with the statement, and he should be able to come out with whatever he wants to convey to you. So items, again, as I mentioned, a question has a stem and a response format. I think this is standard most, even for MCQs or anywhere. An item has a stem and a response format, and you have to remember that the stems, they have to be very, 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 very short, preferably less than 20 words, and you should never try to have modifiers there. You can see the first question here: how many elective cases were in brackets percentage of total elective receive NBM from midnight solids onwards, orders overall. So there are so many modifiers here, so many, I think probably the respondent would get really, really, really confused. This is from one of our surveys, but it was a survey done among experts. So we could still accept this question because they would probably understand. But if this similar question is given to a lay person, I don't think he would attempt this question. So it is very, very important that you look at all the eliminating all the modifiers, and it's not ambiguous. This question is very, very ambiguous. If you look at the next question, do you have services of a dietitian in your hospital? So it's a simple question. So we are asking such a simple one-liner question. It has less than 20 words. It is definite. There is a definite endpoint, yes or no. There cannot be a maybe. So it has a definite endpoint that he can agree or disagree. So this is how, as far as possible, stem and of an item should be, so that the respondent is able to make a clear decision. So there are many types of response formats. It can be as in other words, question can be an open-ended question. It can be a closed-ended question. It can be semi-closed question. For example, here, you can just look place of work, government medical college, private medical college. So your respondent has to choose from any of these. He cannot vary and say, I have something else to say. He has to choose from these things. So this is called as a closed-ended question. So where you have a definite endpoint and these are the only choices you can choose from, you can always go for a closed-ended question. The main advantage is very easy to analyze in the end, and especially in your softwares, it's very easy. It gives you the data right away. So this is a semi-closed question here. Actually, electrocardiogram, non-invasive blood pressure, pulse oximetry, etc., etc. There is one section called as others here. So the respondent can enter whatever he wants in this others. If he chooses others, so that is one thing. So it's a little bit difficult to analyze. He may choose among these 6 options. Most of them would probably choose among the 6 options. There would be a few who choose others. So you need to collect this data at a later date once you're completed your survey, and then you need to analyze them. So this is an open-ended question. So here there's a blank line here where the respondent is free to enter whatever kind of suggestion or whatever kind of information he wants to. There are some things that you can actually do. You can validate these answers. You can put it in numbers. You can put it in. You can accept only numbers. Then this particular software would help you. It would help you in a later date during analysis. But otherwise, this is generally an open-ended question. So there are many kinds of response formats. Also, you can use Likert scales, rating scales, pictorial scales, VAS, rank lists. So umpteen number of response formats. So you need to decide when you're framing a questionnaire what would be appropriate for that particular question. And most of your software, whether it's SurveyMonkey or Google Forms, provides for all these scales. You can add pictures there. You can do anything. So it's very, very important you know that. So once you finish framing a set of questions, you've gone through all the Delphi format, you've framed the questionnaire is ready. You need to validate this questionnaire. So why do you need to validate it? What does this validity mean? So your validation of this questionnaire, it establishes that you can estimate whether the tool measures the thing that it is supposed to measure. So in other words, with the inference made from the data obtained, will it be a valid inference? So let us say, for example, you have a tool, you need to be sure that you're trying to assess what you're trying to assess from that. You're going to get the data you want to assess for, actually, right? So that is your validation. So validation are of many types. Main among them are content validation and construct validation. So content validation is the extent to which the item and the questionnaire measure what it is designed to assess. So generally, content validation is done among experts. We'll look into that a little bit later. Construct validation is usually how the questionnaire compares with a pre-existing validated question. So let us say, for example, there is some tool that is already available. For example, a pain scale. You want to measure a pain scale using a survey for chronic pain or whatever. You can compare your questionnaire to a pre-validated form, pre-validated questionnaire. For example, a VAS score can also be used, an NRS can be used, or whatever. If we'll talk about that later on. Again, we'll go into the depth of that. So now coming to content validation. Content validation is nothing but it is a task of a group of experts. You can go for n number of experts. Usually, you need to go for. We usually go for 10 experts. Usually, 8 or 9 of them reply, and you need to assess your questionnaire, each of your item and your whole questionnaire based on clarity, ambiguity, relevance, simplicity. This is what is recommended by one of the experts, Polite et al. They have written a lot of articles on content validation. And this again, there are each expert needs to grade these on a scale of 1 to 4. Then you need to, if the expert feels that he needs to give a score of 1, he feels that probably the content is not valid, then he has to add on his remarks. He should be able to be given the freedom to say what would actually be better, and based on these scales, I'll show you a sheet that's already entered. So this is how you try to enter. If if the expert has already given a scale of 4, you put it as X, if not 0. 4 or 3, then you put it as an X. 1 or 2, you put it as 0, and then you see what is the number of agreement. Then you get a kappa statistic from that. Of course, this is all done by a statistician, but you can also sit and do it. But only thing is, you should be able to do it in an Excel sheet, enter all the formulas. So based on this, you try to calculate the content validity index item-wise. So each item or each question, you can calculate a content validity index and a scale-wise content validity index. These has proper, item-wise content validity index of more than 0.9 is very good. Scale-wise content validity index of greater than 0.9 is also desirable. So you need to get all this data, and you need to get a kappa statistic too. As I mentioned here, you can see the last column. There are, you can say that probably the item is excellent, excellent, excellent. Somewhere it would come as good. If it is more than zero point 0.8, it is excellent. If it is 0.6 to 0.8, 0.7 to zero point 0.8, it is good. So there are various forms of measurement that you use and classify your item. So depending on that, you can always modify your item depending on what the experts opine. That is about. Next, coming to construct validity. Construct validity is used to validate a questionnaire that measures something that cannot be directly observed. For example, pain. Pain, you cannot observe pain. You can only question him about pain, and it's a subjective phenomenon. So you can have a pain questionnaire. Only thing is, how do you do the construct validity for it? You have a validated pain questionnaire for a pain assessment tool, for example, your VAS score or your NRS score, and you try to correlate your questionnaire with that already validated existing method of assessing pain. So let us say, for example, you try to do convergent validity in your construct validity. You have a new pain scale, and here you have an already established pain scale, for example, your VAS score or NRS or whatever, and you compare these two and try to correlate these two methods of assessing pain. So that is called as convergent validity. There may be some questionnaires or your scales for which there is no direct already validated tool. So you may need to do it on a different scale. For example, if there's no pain scale, what do? You assess and take a new pain scale versus a mobility assessment tool. So you see, correlate whether your pain scale actually correlates with a mobility assessment tool. And you will be able to say probably this is the construct validity satisfied or not satisfied, whatever you are. So as a part of content validity, there is something called as face validity also. Most of the time, your content validity is done among a group of experts, but your survey may need to be distributed among lay people in the population. So depending on that, if it needs to be distributed among lay persons, you need to do a face validity, because it's very important to know whether your group of respondents would be able to understand the questions, would be able to relate to the questions. So it's very, very important. So you need, in such cases, you definitely need to do a face validity. There's something called as criterion validity also, the ability of questionnaire to measure how well one measure predicts, predicts an outcome in comparison to another measure. So these are all a little bit complicated, and it would be better, to seek the help of a statistician at this stage. He would definitely be able to help you at every stage of validation. After you validate your questionnaire, you need to see whether it's actually reliable. So reliability means you will be able to get the same answer or a standard answer how many ever times you administer this survey. So in other words, in simple words, I can say that it measures the consistency of the results of your questionnaire. So it's very important to do that. And there are various methods to do it. Basically, there are three methods. You may need to check the internal consistency. And how do you do that? How consistent the questionnaire is in measuring the same construct. So you distribute it again among your peers or your experts, and then you try to get a Cronbach's alpha. Usually, it usually ranges between 0 to 1. Again, a statistician would be able to help you actually in the steps of how to do it. But if you get a Cronbach's alpha statistic of around 0.7, that would be acceptable for your survey question. So the other thing that you can actually do is a retest reliability can do. What you can do is you can have a set group of people, you can administer the survey questionnaire to them, and you can wait for a period of time, say 15 days or a month, and you can re-administer the survey to them and see whether there is reliability among the results. Of course, you measure, you use the correlation coefficient to measure this type of, as a statistic for this type of reliability. But again, one thing you should remember is how much time should elapse between administrations. That is a big question. And usually, they say that probably they should have forgotten the first set of answers that they have given. Some of them advocate 1 month, some of them advocate 15 days. So that is a question that is really dependent on the question. So you can have something called as an inter-rater reliability also. As you did your content validity using a group of experts, you can have a group of people who are going to answer the question, or they complete a check, and these group of experts are also going to complete a checklist on behavior of examinees. So you give your questionnaire to a group of respondents, then you ask them to you prepare a checklist, and um, you give them, let us say, for example, how are they related to the questions, and they try to complete the checklist on the behavior of the examinees or the respondents. And you check how far these group of multiple raters you have given it to, they agree with respect to the behavior of the examinees or the respondents. So again, here you estimate a kappa statistic. Of course, this again, I think best left to statisticians. Most of the time, they'll be able to give you a number and they'll be able to explain to you what it means. We do it sometimes, but then we do it ourselves sometimes, but it's always better to have a statistician. So once you have done this big exercise, validation and checking the reliability of your questionnaire, it's always better to pilot a survey. Identify a group of people, probably a group of people send it to them. What I usually do it is send it to a group of people, my postgraduates or my senior residents, depending on the population I want to distribute the survey to, and I elicit answers from them. And I asked them, how was the survey? Was it easy to answer? Did you understand? Did you find it very long? Did you find it too short? Was there something else I could include? So even after validation, this is very, very, very important that you do this exercise. There are two things which would really come across when you pilot a survey, especially if it's a very long survey. It would really help you to shorten it. People would really answer the survey and then give you feedbacks, how long it took, and what they would they feel is not very, very relevant to them. So it's very, very important that you pilot the survey at least twice. It and it is very useful to shorten the survey. So now, once you have done all these things, you need to select a sample population. Of course, you can use any method of sampling. It can be simple, random, stratified, etc. And once you have selected the sample, you need to have a sample size. So of course, SurveyMonkey provides a sample size calculator, or you can use openepi.com. Go to sample size calculation and go to proportions, and there you can enter the population size. And to be frank, commonly the population size is taken. If you don't know the actual population size, it is taken to be 1 lakh. And you can estimate the sample size based on one particular question and what is the anticipated frequency of one particular answer. And you can put a confidence limit. Usually what absolute precision we choose is around 5%. And that would give us a good sample size. Usually this is what is there in surveymonkey.com. You choose a population of 1 lakh. This is actually 1 lakh is a constant. It chooses for itself. You can change it if you want, and a confidence level and a margin of error, and you get a sample size. Once you have calculated the sample size, it's very, very important that if you are using a software, it's important that you design the software. I mean, you enter the questions in the software in such a way that you follow a particular order, and this order again, it would probably be good and would have come out clear to you what order you have to enter the questions in your pilot surveys, from the feedback from your pilot surveys, and you can go on to administer your survey. So again, how during administration, it's very, very important to remember that most of our surveys that we do are web-based surveys, and most of the people would not answer or respond to your survey the first time, and you may need to send repeated emails. It's always better that you do it through emails rather than your social media. That is one thing I really want to stress again and again, because you know the number of emails you're sending, you know the number of responses you get, so you know the response. Whereas if you just display it on your your social media somewhere, people do answer, but you really don't know what is the population you have actually reached. So if you meet the sample size, fine, but if you don't meet the sample size, then again you're in trouble. So probably you have to use other methods, right? So always better to use repeated emails, especially if you are doing the web-based survey. There are many surveys where this happened to us, and we had to use mixed modes. We had to take a printout of that survey and take it to some conference, distribute it among all the people present there, and take elicit answers from them. This has happened to us. It does happen, but you should remember that you should achieve the sample size. So now, a small note on data and analysis. I'm not going to go in the depths of it. It's not a part of this talk, but there are guidelines for data quality in surveys. It's always better to have a look at that if you have some doubt. And again, data can be descriptive, qualitative, quantitative. So there are various kinds of data that you can get from your survey. So your analysis has to be based on that. So as I mentioned earlier, you may just present your data in the form of a descriptive format, or you can always go ahead and present your data as an explanatory survey also. You may do some kind of analysis also. You can apply chi-square tests. There are various kinds of tests, or you can use correlation coefficients. All this can be done. Only thing is you need to have the help of a good statistician who would be able to point you in the right direction. Again, once you have finished all your data analysis, you should remember that there is a proposed checklist for reporting your survey. So whenever you send it for publication, remember that you always go through this checklist. It would also probably be better to go through this checklist when you're designing your survey also, or writing your survey, the results of your survey. So this is the checklist. It talks about title, abstract, background. So it goes in detail what should be there, what is whether you've reported the validity, reliability information, scoring of classification process, reference links. So many things. So whether you have referred it's always better, whenever you do the validity, what is the method you have used? You can provide a reference for that. That would be a very good thing. And what was the method of data collection? So if you go through this checklist, you get an idea what you need to do to design your questionnaire and how you validate them. So again, whether the survey administration method, whether it was a self-administered, web-based, non-web-based, whether face-to-face interview, all this very, very important. And when you publish or write your survey methodology, and you need to put in as many number of graphs and as many amount of data that you get from your survey has to be represented in the terms of graphs and numbers possible. Or if it's qualitative data, you may need to analyze it in a different way, for which you need to seek the help of an expert statistician. So results, again, as I mentioned, it can be descriptive, it can be explanatory. It can be, you can use a multivariate analysis, you can use you can use a univariate analysis. There are so many things that you can do, but you need to have the help of a good statistician. It's always better to mention the limitations. Most of the surveys would have one kind of limitation or the other. And if there was some funding that was sought, it's always better to use that and provide acknowledgements. All these things are very, very important. And also discuss the external validity of your results, how far you feel that the results of your survey can be generalized to the population. So this is very, very important to put in when you're publishing your survey. So to summarize, whenever you are designing a survey, you determine the methodology. That means you try to go ahead with it. You feel that probably the best method to elicit the data or solve your problem, it would be to do a survey, and you determine whether it's going to be feasible. Then you develop your instrument, you select a sample, you conduct a pilot, revise your instrument, develop the instrument again. And once you're sure about your instrument, you conduct your survey, and then you record your data. Thank you very much. This is my email ID. Any queries, I think you can forward to that. Thank you. These are my resources. These are very good articles actually on how to design a survey and what are the kinds of items that can be included. Thank you. Over to Dr. Rakesh.
Thank you so much for the nice session, sir. And
Thank
you have covered many important aspects that must be part of any type of survey methodology based studies, the components and how to go about it. So this is open for participants. Any comments or any questions? So Dr. Pradeep, you have question from Dr. Amarja. She wants to know, does it need IEC approval, the ethical approval when you conduct a survey?
IEC probably you would require a waiver most of the time. But if patients are going to be involved in your survey, probably you need to have a consent form, a proper consent form, and you may need to have a IEC approval.
So in a very broad sense, as you rightly mentioned, these surveys should be having, because the human beings are involved here. So it is always good to have a consent form, and also there should be an ethical approval for these type of surveys, because you are involving their opinions in certain aspect, and at certain things, a patient-related information should be there. So it is always important for an ethical approval. And when we say the ethical approval is not required just for the information, it is not that ethical approval is not required. It should be a waiver of ethical approval, and they should mention that there is nothing ethical aspect of it, and it does not require approval as such. So they should be at least either of them. And we will strongly feel that there is no harm. Whenever in doubt, I mentioned in the last time also, whenever in doubt, get an ethical approval and do submit your any study, any type of studies on the registration portal also. There are many of them. CTRI is one, so you can go ahead and do it. We have a question from Dr. Chidanand Swami. He wants to know, as we know that the response is always low, say around 20 to 30% on an average for most surveys. What is the minimum acceptable responses for results to be robust and valid? Very important question.
It's a very pertinent question, actually. We know, as I mentioned in my presentation also, response rate especially varies in the type of administration. Usually face-to-face interviews and your telephonic interviews, you can have very high response rate, even up to 90%. That's very good. And for them, any acceptable range would be 70%. But it's almost near impossible to get such a response rate when it comes to web-based surveys or your postal surveys. People don't respond that well. So whenever I do a web-based survey, what I do is I calculate the sample size, and I calculate the population I want to distribute it in based on the response rate. I usually take a response rate of 10%, very low response rate. And what I do is recently I got a sample size of 340 or something like 34384, something like that. And I distributed this, I calculated this sample I was going to send it out to around, based on a response rate of 10%, I sent it out to 3,000 people, 5,000 people. So this is the best we can do. But usually, generally, they say around 20% response rate or 15% response rate even is good for a web-based or a postal survey. But for face-to-face interviews, 70% is really needed. Generally, they get that high response.
I think this is important because
sorry to interrupt, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
is CTRI required for this kind of surveys? And if we apply for ethical behavior, how can we go for CTRI? And what is journal editors say on that without approval of ethical and CTRI? How do we proceed ahead?
Ma'am, I suggest that you go for ethical approval. Until today, whatever surveys I've done, I've always taken a waiver of an ethical approval. If they give an approval, fine. They say you can conduct the survey, fine. If they don't, if they say give me a waiver of approval, that's also fine. I always present my surveys to an ethical committee. That is one thing. It's always better to seek that. And second thing is CTRI. Of course, you can always register your surveys, any kind of studies on CTRI. There's nothing wrong in registering your surveys on CTRI. Also, it comes under the section of a cross-sectional observational trial. Doesn't matter. You can always register it. And about I think ethical committee approval, most of the national or international journals would, really insist on that. I think Rakesh can throw a little bit light on that better than me. And even CTRI, I think they would, they may not insist on it, CTRI registration for a survey, but it would definitely help you. Wherever it's mandatory, it would definitely. Dr. Rakesh, can you just highlight on that point here?
Dr. Pradeep rightly mentioned. So I will take Dr. Shikha, and this is for everybody we have been discussing in last webinars also. I think most of the journals will always appreciate if any type of studies involving the human beings are having an ethical approval and they are registered on any of the online registration portal. So if in any doubt, get an ethical approval and upload in the registration portal. This is always advisable. And this is primarily, the reason is that we are looking for the safety of the participants, one. And second, we are also looking for the transparency of the research, what we have planned and what we have done. And this, if done various registration portal, it always adds value to your study. So please go ahead and do both the things. With regards to the registration, the response, we remember nowadays we are forwarding the links on various web portals and social media. So when we want to say a response rate, because we do not know that how many persons has been forwarded or re-forwarded those links, especially when you're doing a web-based surveys, it becomes difficult to assess the response rate. And when we say the response rate is very low, try to understand that that response rate low could be for variable reasons. And one of the reasons could be that people are not responding. But if we take the other way, people may not be responding because they take it otherwise and they are not in sync what you are asking. And hence you will get a biased opinion if the response rate is very low. That's why you should be very selectively sending those surveys in selected predefined population so that you know that this was your numerator and this was your denominator, which you have done from your study. Dr. Pradeep, greetings and good presentation from Dr. Sri Ganesh. Dr. Jagruti wants to ask, data is important, but how it is important for the freelancer anesthesiologist like me?
Okay. Ma'am, it depends on what is your research problem. So you may want to conduct a survey which is very, very relatable to private practice. You may want to know what is the, recently we have done a survey. We have not yet published it. I don't want to go to the details of that results. So we have done a survey where it could be relevant even to a private practitioner. It would be definitely be relevant to the researcher, definitely be relevant to the academician. So there are definitely, there was one survey I showed you. That was a survey I did on medication errors. That would definitely be relevant even to a private practitioner. So it depends. Any kind of research would be relevant to many kinds of groups. It need not be relevant to only a research. So that is one thing. And you can definitely, private practitioners also can do surveys. They can design surveys related to their practice. There's nothing wrong in that. And probably considering the diversity of the cases that they do and timelines it takes for them, it would be a better kind of research for them. They want to really address a small problem. So I think really it would help.
Perfect. Dr. Sripath wants to ask, what's the best mode of administration for unbiased responses in survey type of studies?
That's a bit difficult, sir. I think a face-to-face interview would be the best mode of administration, but I think it requires a lot of time. It involves a lot of expenditure also, because you need to train your interviewers. I think the best as of today, if you want to do for a large scale population, would still remain a web-based survey, even though there is some amount of bias there. It is an acceptable bias, and generally we can make out, that you can make out the bias that can.
There has to be something unbiased one, because if you are doing it, whenever you report a study, you should be very, very transparent as a part of your authors that what are the possibilities of bias into your survey. So when we say, Dr. Pradeep mentioned it very clearly, when we say that the response rate is very low, as an editor, we look forward that whether this survey has been filled by only those who were on one side and it has not been filled by the other side, because the response rate is very low. Same thing when you see, remember when you do a randomized controlled trial, and if you recruit, say, 50 patients in each group, and you analyze only 30 patients after exclusion or after the loss to follow-up or for whatever reasons, now this becomes a bias, because why those 20 patients? Were they very sick or they were very good? And that's why they would have been excluded from the patient for study analysis finally. And that gives an impression that, yes, there is some bias. So that's why you should say, you should, as an author, because you are the best person, you have done the survey, you have done the review of literature, you have validated the questionnaire tool, and then you are analyzing the data. You should be clear and transparently reporting it, that what could be the possible reason for low response, what could be the possible reason for, sometimes we say, we got 1,000 survey questionnaire, 200 were excluded because they were partly filled or some questions were not filled. So this means maybe those some questions, they may not be agreeing to it, that's why they have not filled it. So your data outcome is being skewed to one side because of those non-response. So actually, if they have done it, they would have got something different. Dr. Abhijit Nair wants to ask two questions. What priority does ISA have for surveys? So I say, if you see the hierarchy of reporting any study, that hierarchy remains the same. If it is the largest will be the meta-analysis, followed by the multicentric studies, followed by a well-sampled size randomized controlled trial with all its ingredients, followed by an observational study, followed by a cross-sectional study, including survey. So this is how, but then this is not the only criteria. When you say a reviewer or an editor-in-chief or editor looks for the article, they are looking for whether there is some novelty into it, whether it is going to help the readership, whether it can change some clinical practice, whether it is generating some new hypothesis, whether it is going to generate future research out of it. So there are many things that would be looked for rather than one type of study. Sometimes, say, if you see the adverse event reports, if somebody is publishing a data of 30,000, 40,000 from multicentric data, it gets more value than doing a small study on 30 patients. So there are many things, but yes, it has its own importance. And that's why we took this session today, because we could see many surveys being done. If you do it well documented, it is very, very important. Dr. Agnihotri wants to say something. Sir, yes, over to you, sir. Sir, you are muted.
We are unable to hear you, sir. We are unable to hear you. Sir, you're not audible, sir.
Now,
yeah, now audible, sir.
Yeah, slightly better. Yeah.
Yes. My sincere congratulations to you and Garg Saab.
Thank you, sir.
My question is very simple. Whatever is collected by, guided by you, Pradeep, and collected by Garg is mooted from the department regarding the postgraduates, those who are the persons by virtue of a thesis. And I don't think with the present scenario, the number of postgraduate registered for PG are very high. And Professor Head is not competent enough to guide each and everybody. So what is your suggestion regarding the basic concept when the thesis is allotted and how they should proceed in the thesis material to mature enough for publication?
So your question is very, very important, sir. We know that thesis is one of the mandatory requirement to clear the MD exam as a part of thesis or dissertation. Yes. And we expect we expect that those who become teachers, they should be well versed for the conduct of good research. From the MD students' point of view, the thesis is given them not to just get a very novel research ideas or publish a landmark study. What we expect from students is they should learn the basic nitty-gritties, components, and the techniques of conducting a good research. They should learn these steps. And that's the reason these people are given the thesis. And simultaneously, there should be some novelty and all those things. So you're rightly said, and that's why I think this webinar series has been started so we can share our experience.
I am happy, Gar. I am happy in that way. But during my time, it was thesis was meant for how to read the journal properly and understand the statistics in the journal. But present scenario, it is very difficult. So I will suggest there should be a statistician from the very beginning to guide the postgraduate regarding collection of the data and how to refine the data. This is simple because I don't think the present HODs are competent enough because 3 years, 4 years they promote and they don't know the word statistics. I'm sorry to say, but my observation says this because I have been examiner for 30 years, so I know all these trends. Thank you very much.
I understand your concern, sir. I hope these webinars will help for people to come forward and learn the things. And I'm sure the things are getting on a better shape.
You see how many HODs are there in India in medical colleges, and only 62% are attending the webinar. This shows their inclination towards the academic upliftment. And hence, that is my question.
Sure. I hope we will try to disseminate. Dr. Abhijit wants to ask how ethical is giving incentives for filling surveys.
Oh, yeah. So incentives, so that is a practice. There's nothing unethical about it, but you never know, it may work against you sometimes. Giving incentives is a double-edged sword. That's what I always say. And you may just invite more and more people to answer. You may have to screen the answers very, very, effectively because you may be targeting some particular population, but actually that population may not be there. Usually incentives are given to population-based surveys rather than, and market surveys, marketing surveys, such kinds of things, rather than academic surveys. So I think till today, I think I've done quite a few, 4 or 5 surveys, but I've never used incentives as a method of eliciting answers. And in a web-based survey, it's really difficult to give incentives. What do you give them actually? You give them, we thought about that actually for a recent survey, we did discuss that. What do you give them? It's a very difficult thing. I think in a face-to-face interview, you can give them something, but otherwise, it can work as a double-edged sword, sir. I've seen that. It need not be always, you may get answers from unrelated people, and then you may have to really, bring it down or screen the results. It may take some time.
Yeah, that's true. Wherever the financier involved, it has to be disclosed during publication because the financial conflict is one of the conflict for altering the outcome of any study parameter, and that should be very, very cautious. Dr. Ankur wants to ask, what is the level of acceptability of a survey findings, unlike a non-survey study like RCT?
So surveys are classified as cross-sectional studies. Of course, they may not reflect, they may not be as strong as a randomized control trial, but it would definitely help you in a lot of things. There are some surveys where you may just be able to generalize the data to the population, especially these descriptive surveys. Most of the time, if you have done the sampling properly, you'll be able to generalize the results to a population. But if it's otherwise, it may help you to develop a hypothesis for a further randomized control trial or a further observational, more stronger trial. So these are the main uses of your survey. Of course, as I mentioned, it's not as strong as a randomized control trial.
Dr. Anand Bangira wants to ask about the validity of the survey in terms of sincerity of responders. How can you assess?
No, that is a constant question, sir. Anand sir, it's a constant question. As I mentioned earlier, it depends on the honesty and the memory of a respondent. You should remember that. And that is one thing. Second thing is we can validate answers. If you're using a web-based survey, you can try to limit these aspects. Like, for example, if you want some data in terms of numbers, you can just validate the answer. I'm not talking about the question. You can validate the answer to say in such a way that the respondent can only enter numbers. He cannot enter any other data. He cannot enter words. So that much you can do. Rest of the things you can't actually have a control on. That is a disadvantage of it.
And I just wanted to know, like, for example, there is a survey regarding comparison between a landmark technique and a ultrasound technique. The response he may give is 90%, though his actual response may be 50% or something for a landmark technique. That is, we tend to project ourselves that we are more successful even with the older technique like that. So what is the, no, I just gave you an example. So
yeah, I understood. Sir.
That may not be the actual result. We tend to give you a wrong results. So
yeah,
that
I got
affect the
your
overall result of the survey. That is what I wanted to know.
Yes, sir. I got your question, sir. Sir, one more thing is these kinds of answers come when you're talking about practice. Generally they don't come when it knowledge or practice. Attitude generally, when you're talking about the attitude of a person, generally they reflect whatever they want to reflect. Generally these results are better. But when it comes to when you're assessing their knowledge or trying to assess a knowledge about, let us say, for example, you ask a question on, what do you know about AI? They may say, I know everything about it. No, one person may say, I know nothing about AI. They may really know, one person may know 25%. The exact amount you may not be able to do. But in such situations, your data is definitely skewed. You don't know how many people will be sincere with what they are trying to come up. So this is where your validity helps, validation of your questionnaire. So these questions, such questions should not be included in the questionnaire at all, because you're not going to get the right kind of data. You know it. So that is where your validation of your questionnaire helps, whether you'll be able to assess what you're trying to measure. So if you're unable to assess it, you will get away by not asking the question rather than asking.
Okay. That's right. Yeah.
That's the important point, because when you report or conduct it, there should be a proper paragraph of validating the questionnaire. So the group has published, Pradeep and group has published in the past how to develop a questionnaire and validate it. And there are statistical tool also which helps you to understand that if you give a question to similar set of population, and if they understand question in a different way, you can statistically analyze by using certain tests like Cronbach's alpha and those values, which will show that the question is ambiguous, either with regards to the stem or the choices. And that's why during validation, this process has to be done, that whatever you want to ask from the question is clear from its content point of view, from clarity point of view, from understanding point of view. And this is part of validation. So that is how this is the most important aspect. If we have not done the validation, probably the study will not have any value, because sometimes we get papers in which they will just say that 20 questions were formed by the researchers and they were distributed and published. So this is not the correct way. Dr. Pradeep has considered those important things. And as Dr. Umesh mentioned, population selection is important. We fully agree with you. As commented by Dr. Anand Bangera also, that we have to develop a questionnaire in which there is no ambiguity left. We have to design in such a way that the content clarity remains very clear, and the person who is not responding to will not respond. Say, for example, Dr. Bangera mentioned about the success rate of a particular block. If the literature says that the success rate of a block is 30 to 70%, if somebody reports 90%, that becomes an outlier. We are not saying that he may not be having a 90%, but then it becomes an issue. And that's why Dr. Pradeep mentioned in one of his questionnaire, and this was one of the question also by one of the participant, where they have asked about the types of surveys. And that's why when we say, when we have interview based of surveys, or direct face-to-face surveys, each survey should also have minimum time of filling. If you have 15 questions and somebody has filled it within a minute, that time should be recorded. If somebody has filled within a minute, it should be an exclusion criteria, because you cannot read 15 questions with 4 stems, analyze and answer them. And that's why some of the good questionnaire will say that a minimum of 5 minutes would be spent on each question. And that's why if you see these questionnaires, sometimes when you put on a web platform, there will be only 3 or 4 questions coming on one, and you will not be able to change it unless you spend 1 minute on them. And that is what increases the robustness of your survey, where you fix up the time, minimum questions, and then proceed further for further choices. And sometimes we put up a dummy questions also. Dummy questions is, and these are called from the statistical point of view. These dummy questions, if somebody answers wrong, or if they are doubling of questions and the answers are different from the same questionnaire, this means that the person has not filled it after reading them. So these are the ways of looking for the validity of the responses. Earlier we talked about validity of questionnaire. Now we are talking about the validity of the responses, which some of the participant is asking, that how serious they were to read the full question, understand, and then attempt for the answers. And this is sometimes, that's why we say, we go ahead and do a qualitative interviews, which is again a part of it, where if you have some queries, you make it, but then qualitative interviews are not descriptions. They are again structured interviews in which you know that this question needs to be asked, and these are the possible answers which are accepted from this. So I think this is.
Can I add a little bit on that? Can
Yeah,
I add a little bit on that?
Yes.
Yeah. Sir, to add on to what Dr. Rakesh said, if you go onto SurveyMonkey or your Google Forms, once you design your questionnaire, you enter your questionnaire, it gives you an average time that is required. It tells you this is the average time probably a respondent would take to complete this survey. That is one thing, right? So you know how much time the respondent would be spending on it. That's one more thing. Then second thing is, to add on to the content part of it, that's why you do a reliability test also. So when you give this survey to a group of people, say for example, such a survey where you mentioned about the success rate of your landmark technique, you give it to a person and you do a test and retest reliability, right? So first time he may say 90%, then next time he may say 100%. So you know that probably his answer is not going to be reliable. Then this question will not be reliable. So that's why it's very, very important that your questionnaire is validated and tested for reliability. So if it doesn't meet that mark, you're not going to pass that question. You're just going to take away that question.
Absolutely. I think we have crossed by 23 minutes. So I must say sincere thanks. Before I say, we have Dr. Mahesh Sinha with us. He is Vice President, ISA National. I welcome sir on behalf of ISA, being the national dignitary. May I request sir to speak a few words, Dr. Mahesh Sinha?
Yeah, Rakesh, good evening. Very
Good evening.
nice initiative taken by you. It can help a lot of people, particularly the postgraduates and even the teachers, as Dr. Nutri sir said. So it's a very nice and good effort. Few people want a change in time or something, if it is, that can be considered, because every person has got a different time frame. So I think you can consider that.
Sure, sir. I will discuss with you, sir. We can always change times. That's not a big issue, because some of the people want it to be 5 to 6 so that they can complete in the hospital and then go home. But if everybody wants to change, I think it's not an issue. We can always change the time, sir.
You can take a survey on that, I think.
Okay, sir, fine. That's a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you. And I also should thank the Indian Society of Anesthesiologists for all the support to the journal and these type of webinars. Thank you, ISA National, for all the support for all the activities related to research and publication webinars. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Dinner outside, yes, sir.
Over to Dr. Kiran and Dr. Kushbu.
So thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for such an informative session. So we'll have the next webinar on 20th of July. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Rakesh. Thank you, Dr. Kiran.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you, sir.